The headlines: roars of fury break out in Leicester as the government sends the city back into lockdown just when the pubs are about to open everywhere else. I just can't believe it, stammered one local resident, overcome with frustration. Whoever is responsible for this outbreak. Meanwhile, sworn enemies of Leicester at Nottingham Forest and Derby County football clubs were reprimanded for tweeting "ha ha" before being advised that the Leicester lockdown was no laughing matter. I pity that city, said one patron queuing outside a pub several days in advance. As soon as I get back in there, I've got darts, I've got pork scratchings, I've got sport, I've got a bar stool. I'm going to go straight to the jukebox and play Belinda Carlisle, Heaven is a Place on Earth. I bet everyone wishes they could be in there too, especially people in Leicester. Where else would you rather be? My name's Andy, that's All Fake News, and you're watching Alverstoke Antiviral. Well, I'm joined here with a very special guest that will hopefully be familiar to you if you've ever been along to AEC, because he does a lot of welcoming for us. And it's Mark Collins. Mark, hello.
Hiya, lovely to see everyone.
Good to see you too, Mark. Mark, you've been on the road today, haven't you? Have you been anywhere interesting?
I've been from Portsmouth to Brighton 3 times, and in Portslade actually, and that's where my dad used to live. So I know that area, so I always like going down that area. Quite seeing it down there. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Is traffic picking up quite a lot now that people are getting back to work?
I didn't stop a lot today, but I did notice in Worthing it was building up a bit. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting, because I did a journey when I went to see my parents last week. And yeah, I went on the motorways and it was the clearest run I've ever had, actually. I did go at weekends, but it was very, very clear, which is nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brighton, yeah, as I say, it's a lovely place. My dad used to live there, so I used to visit my grandparents down there. So yeah.
It's quite a city as Brighton. There's a lot in Brighton, isn't there?
There is, yeah. Really.
Yeah. Now, Mark, you have some verses you wanted to talk to us about, which have been important to you, not only when you became a Christian, but also in your Christian life. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
I'll share the first one. Is when I was about sort of early teens, I used to get these leg aches in the middle of the night. Is to keep me up. But a couple of occasions I'd read the Bible. And this verse came out to me. It's in Psalm 86, verse 5. It's the New King James version. I don't use it at the moment, but it's how I remember the verse. So, for you, Lord, are good and ready to forgive and abundant in mercy to all those who call upon you. And that I don't think I was actually became a Christian then, but I read it. I remember praying it. And I think it's a lovely promise, isn't it? It's a promise. It's a promise for two lots, isn't it? It's a promise for the non-Christian and a Christian as well. The Christians and the non-Christians. And for me, when I do fail the Lord, which I do, even as a Christian, we all fail him. That's a wonderful promise, isn't it? For you, Lord, are good and ready to forgive and abundant in mercy to all those who call upon you. So that's the verse that I keep falling back on. An easy verse, but I love that verse. And probably where I think I was saved, I can't be certain at the time, but I went on a church house party, which if people don't know what it is, it's like a church going on holiday together.
Yes.
There's preaching every day, that sort of thing. And it was on what Colin did read the verse, I don't think he really spoke on it, on Colossians 2, verse 14. He erased a certificate of debt with its obligation that was against us and opposed to us, and taking it out of the way by nailing it to the cross. And he was preaching on that. And that's, although I was brought up in a Christian home, in a good, my parents are Christians, that's the first time I really understood. It sort of sank home that God has, all my sins have been nailed to the cross, nailed to Jesus, and it wasn't the nails that held him there; it was the love of Jesus he had for me, and it just struck me. And both of those verses, quite often in the communion, where Colossians 1 especially, I often turn to it. I find it so comforting, especially when you fail God in a week and you take communion. You think, well, I'm here because of what Jesus done on the cross for me. That makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah.
So both those verses I turn to, and sometimes I find it nice to to actually pray a psalm.
Yeah, and there's wonderful stuff on forgiveness in the Psalms as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
The reality of God's love and how much we need that, not just when we become Christians, but actually ongoing in life.
Yeah, and that first Psalm 86 is a lovely verse. It's promising to both non-Christian and Christians. The promise is still there, and it's, I remember hearing a sermon on it. They're lovely verses, aren't they? Sometimes I always turn back to. Yeah.
So how long have you been a Christian, Mark?
Well, I'm just turned 50 last year, and I became a Christian when I was 15, so 14, 15. I was quite rebellious to my parents. I wasn't away at school, but I was quite rebellious towards my parents. So Lord's teaching me things and to hang on to verses like these.
Yeah. Yeah, that's terrific.
Yeah.
And how has lockdown been for yourself and for Celeste?
Well, as you know, I was a month on the beginning of the lockdown. I had a month on furlough with the company, and I felt that was God's goodness to me at the time, because me and Celeste had a difficult period before that, and it was good to have a month's rest. So it was good for that, and thankfully I've got the job back, which is, well, I always had the job, but you know what I mean. But, that was good, and that's been good. Yeah, and also I found with lockdown, where there's been no actual going to church, I've said to several people, I find it really nice being able to chat to people and get to know them instead of phoning them up and asking, could you do welcoming? Could you give a lift to someone? It's really nice just to chat to them in a way. That's what I found most enjoyable about lockdown for me, because I am a people person and I do like chatting to people. And I haven't done it so much recently because I've been working, but I really enjoyed that side of things. And when I was on furlough, I could, pray a bit more and read. So yeah.
Have you been reading books as well?
Yeah, I read one book. I'm not really great. I've got a big bookcase, but I'm not a great reader. Mostly for reference. But this book I actually read. It's called Fresh Wind, Fresh Fire. Have you heard of that one? It's by Jim Simbella. He's pastor of Brooklyn Tabernacle in New York. I don't know if you've ever heard of, but basically that the church was really struggling. Had only about sort of 20 members. And it was close to closing down. The pastor was really getting real down, and then God moved everyone to pray. They kept praying and praying and praying, and God answered prayer, supplying money. Some people got saved. Some Christians repented from sin, and then it just carried on, and it grew to about sort of 3,000. So it is quite he emphasizes a lot on prayer. He said more people were converted. He saw God do more work through the prayer meeting than his sermons. He said. That's what
That's interesting. thing to say, really, isn't it? Because we spend a lot of time thinking about Sundays, and the prayer meeting is often in lots of churches is the sort of what's the word? I don't know, the slightly underwhelming, slightly neglected thing that we don't give as much thought or commitment to. But actually,
I think it's really important. I think prayer is really important. Especially prayer in the church. And saying that, since I've been off furlough, my prayer life hasn't been, as good as it should have been. But I struggle sometimes at work and struggle with just praying. But it was quite refreshing to be having time to sit down and pray and talk to people when I was on furlough. So it was a blessing time. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, Mark, it's great to hear how you're doing, and great to hear what you've been reading. Is that a book that came from Brian by any chance?
No, I got it from Amazon.
Oh, okay. Right.
I wrote it I gave it to Brian to read, and Brian thinks it's a really good book. So.
Oh, right. Okay. Well then. Who can disagree with? Because Brian's read everything, so
Yeah. Well, he said it's a good book, and it is a good book. I could give it to you, baby. It is a really good book. It's what happened and how they reached out to so many people, from gay people to lots of problems. It's amazing, really, what happened. But prayer again, a lot of prayer went in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Mark, thanks so much for sharing that with us, and thank you for joining us. It's lovely to see you and touch base.
Yes.
Yeah. So, see you later.
Yes. Just to say that my Celeste and I have celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations! Was that?
We did a bit of mini golf on the weekend.
Oh, was that this weekend?
Yeah, and we had a Domino's pizza in the evening. So.
Oh, very good. Very romantic.
That was nice. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Well, I'm sure people would
keep praying for Celeste as well. Keep praying for Celeste. She'll get better. And she's got a few doctor's appointments coming up, blood tests. So it'd be nice to see her. Yeah. The doctors give her some sort of, diagnosis. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sure people will be very keen to see you both again and to pray for you as well. So yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, Mark.
Thanks.
Bye.
Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you. Well, today we're going to talk about the books of Chronicles, and I'm joined here with Colin, and we're going to start off, Colin, by thinking about where would you rather be? Where is the place on earth you would most want to be? And the reason I'm asking this question is because a lot of us might have been stuck at home for a while, or stuck in the same space, or dreaming about where you could go if you could form a bubble, or maybe you have formed a bubble. Where would you be? And I wonder if you have any special place you'd like to go to right now.
So I'd quite like to go and see my sister and her family in North Cornwall. Probably camping, although with the distancing and all that, I don't know if the campsites will be packed. Or I'd go and see my brother up in Surrey. Yeah, meet up with family, really. Yeah.
Are you going cabin? Have you got cabin fever?
How does that? What are the symptoms of that? High temperature, coughing.
It's when you go crazy because you've been stuck in your shed or your cabin or your house with however many floors you've got.
Yeah, I don't think so. No, I'd go out with the dog and stuff like that, shopping.
Okay.
See the odd person here and then. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is that wherever we might want to go, the Bible in some ways is a bit like a travel brochure, isn't it? Because it points us and invites us to a place like no other, a place where God invites us to be, and exactly the sort of place we want to be. And it's a place that's foreshadowed in the Old Testament and is won for us in the New Testament through Jesus. And that's why we're looking today at 1 and 2 Chronicles, because they point us to the place God invites us to. Now, books of Chronicles, what kind of book is a book of Chronicles? Any thoughts on that, Colin?
Well, if you've read 1 and 2 Kings, you'll find it very repetitive, because you're thinking, my goodness, I've read all this before, haven't I, somewhere? And you will have done. Yeah. But it's a history book of the kings of the 2 kingdoms. Yeah.
Yeah. it's very weird, because you come to the end of Kings and you get the exile and the end of the exile. Well, the first glimmer of hope at the end. The exile is the release of the king. You open Chronicles and you get Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enosh, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah, the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and so on. And all of a sudden, the continuous history that we've had for several books now breaks. And we're at a list of names, a big genealogy that dominates the first 9 chapters or so, giving us this enormous sweep from the beginnings of the world and Adam, all the way beyond the end of Kings, actually, into the post-exilic period. So you've got about 8 generations after the last sort of kings. So you get Zerubbabel and people like that who come back from exile and their descendants. So it goes right to the sort of the end period of Old Testament history, as well as looking back right to the very start. And the really interesting thing about Chronicles is there are 2 books, and again, they form a unity. We get about 8 chapters of family history, which turns a lot of people off, but actually is quite important, isn't it? Because it's our family history, it's your family and my family history, because it goes back to Adam and the human race. And it's the history of the family God gave his promises to. His promises of blessing through Abraham, the promise of the serpent crusher, the promise of a home and descendants in a world of curse and death, and all that stuff. And it's tracking the plot of this family, because they're the ones through whom God is going to save the world in the Old Testament. And after we get to the end of the names, we get all these genealogies, mostly kings, but also priests and other Israelite tribes and this stuff. We get narrative and history, and it starts telling some of the stories. And as you say, some of it's quite repetitive. But it would be such a mistake to think, oh, well, this is just one big mishmash of random historical events, which doesn't really hold together or have any sort of unity. It's conveying a specific message. And this is where the interest comes in Chronicles, because it's chosen to convey a very particular message. And if you've read Kings, actually, you might think, well, I can't be bothered with Chronicles, but actually reading Chronicles and comparing them is really interesting, because you start to see what the unique emphasis of Chronicles is. You start to see the special bits, the bits that the chronicler is more interested in talking about, and the bits he's less interested in talking about. Some of the things are the same. You get the same emphasis on the kings. You get the same emphasis on the good old days of Solomon and David, and then generations of sin leading to exile. We get the point that God punishes sin. We get the point that he's faithful and compassionate as well. But there are differences in emphasis. And I've got 3 to mention here. 3 differences of emphasis. And, you've disabled screen sharing, Colin. Could you enable screen sharing for me, please?
How do I do that? Share screen.
Participants.
There you are.
You go to participants. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's good. I've got 3 to share with you. These are 3 points which I think are quite important. Special emphases of Chronicles. And the first one is a focus on Jerusalem and Judah. The second is generally more positive in its moral assessments. And thirdly, there's a focus on the temple. And the 3 sort of hang together. So the first special emphasis you notice, there is a focus on Jerusalem and Judah. You may recall for Kings, we had a nice graph with 2 kingdoms going up and down.
Yeah.
And so on. And Chronicles doesn't do that. It doesn't track both kingdoms, particularly 2 Chronicles after the kingdom splits. It very much focuses on Judah. And you get the kings of Israel occasionally stepping into the narrative as sort of subplots. Or I think Elijah writes a letter to one of the kings at one point, while he's busy in the north dealing with Ahab. He writes him a letter. But you don't get the sense that we're watching both kingdoms. We're watching the kingdom of Judah, particularly in the second book. And that doesn't mean that the rest of Israel is unimportant, because in fact, the phrase all Israel is really important, particularly in the first book. That under David, all Israel come together, all Israel are gathered with him and a part of his kingdom. And there's a huge emphasis on that all Israel phrase. And the chronicler is spending lots of time on these good old days when Israel was together. But then after the split, it's very much Judah. And the camera's on Judah. And we'll see that, and we'll see why that is in a bit. So first of all, there's this focus on Jerusalem and Judah. Secondly, Chronicles is generally more positive in its moral assessments, generally. Because if you read the accounts of the reigns of the kings, what you'll see is it's actually much more positive on the whole, particularly with Solomon and David. So the big scandals of David's reign you might be able to think of, things like Bathsheba and the war with Absalom and Solomon's wives and idolatry, that isn't covered. Bathsheba is mentioned once in passing, but David's sin with her is not gone over as content. And there are points where David does sin, he does the census and so on, but generally Chronicles doesn't major on that. And there are points in the story where we find out things about bad kings that are actually quite good. So one of the worst kings, Manasseh, has a prayer of repentance. So there's a moment where he comes to his senses and he repents of the sin he's doing, which you don't get in Kings. And you find out, oh, actually, he had a change of heart from his behavior. And occasionally you get the flip side. You find out some dirty laundry about good kings like Asa and so on, and Hezekiah. And the book is more critical of them and pulls more emphasis onto their misdeeds. So what do we make of this? Are these just two very different histories? Well, no. I think it's worth remembering that neither book is trying to say everything. Neither of them are exhaustive. They're very selective. And every now and then you get a formula saying something like, as for all the events of Solomon's reign, are they not written in all the other books that are out there in the annals and the chronicles of this prophet? You can go and read. And the idea is not that they're denying any bad stuff or underplaying any stuff, but they're focusing on what they need to focus on to make their points. And that's what's going on. And I think with the good kings, who we hear more bad stuff about, what's going on is they're being slightly undercut and they're being shown that actually they are not the great hope that the promises of the Davidic kingdom would come to. It's not them, even though they're very good. And with the kings David and Solomon particularly, I don't think their bad stuff is shown. And I think the reason for that is not because the Chronicle is in denial about anything, but he wants to look back on David and Solomon as a high point. He wants to look and talk about their achievements and focus on the big thing their reigns accomplished. And he's focusing very much on this third point, which is a focus on the temple. Chronicles is almost obsessed with the temple. And you can see this when you read through. There are other concerns as well. He talks about the kings as much as the priests as well, and the right relationship with God and all that stuff as well. But the crowning achievement of Solomon and David in building the temple is just given massive attention, which it isn't in the book of Kings. So just a glance at the chapter headings through the book will tell you this. 1 Chronicles 13 and 15, David brings in the ark. 16, they all sing a psalm in front of the ark as God's presence is there with them. 17, God promises to build David a house, and because David's promised to, or had in his heart to build God a house. 21, David buys the site of the temple, the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, where atonement is made. Then 22, we get preparations for the temple. 23, list of Levites to work in the temple. 24, division of priests. 25, temple musicians. 26, gatekeepers, treasurers. 28, David gives out the plans for the temple, which the Spirit has given to him. 1 Chronicles 29, David collects gifts for this temple. And all this emphasis about David's activity in building the temple is given. And then in 2 Chronicles 2-4, Solomon builds it and he dedicates it 5-7. And there's so much focus on the temple. And this book, chronicling the history of Israel, doesn't focus on the Exodus, and it doesn't focus on the law giving. It doesn't focus on the judge. It focuses on the kings, and particularly the kings who build and establish the temple. And I suspect that's why we don't get as much dirt on David and Solomon, because he's busy emphasizing what they actually got right, because he wants us to understand that the best kings in Israel's history are actually temple builders. And what they achieve in building a house for God and having God dwell with them is just so important to the writer. This is what Solomon prays at the dedication. These are texts in Chronicles. Here's the first one. This is what Solomon prays. He says, "Now arise, Lord God, and come to your resting place, you and the ark of your might. May your priests, Lord God, be clothed with salvation. May your faithful people rejoice in your goodness. Lord, do not reject your anointed one. Remember the great love promised to David, your servant." And there you have king and temple as the two massive themes. You have this sense that God is coming to dwell in his dwelling place. And this is why it's so important that we focus on Jerusalem and that the narrative stays on Jerusalem, because that's where it's at. God's resting place is there, in this temple, in this setup where atonement is made and where right relationship and right worship of him in the Old Covenant takes place. Fascinatingly, there's a moment in 11 where Levites, when the kingdom splits, Levites migrate to Jerusalem, and they all come sort of flooding back while the north gets into idolatry. Because there's a recognition that they really need to be in Judah, and they need to be working with the temple, because you can't just make up your own religion. You have to go with God's temple. This is the place where he dwells, a place like no other, a place where you can be close to God. That's what David and Solomon's reigns achieved, a place where his goodness can be enjoyed, a place where salvation happens and his covenant love flows to his king and to his people. And this is why I started with the question, where do you want to be? Do you know, Colin, the old hymn, what's it called? Glorious things of thee are spoken.
Yeah, I remember that line, yes.
Vaguely, yes. And it's one of those hymns which needs a bit of, you need to think about it slightly, but once you realize what it's saying, it says, glorious things of thee are spoken, Zion, city of our God. And it says, it celebrates the wonders of living with God. It says, on the rock of ages founded, what can shake thy sure repose? With salvation's walls surrounded, thou may smile at all thy foes. It's a sense that if you're in this place with God, where his goodness is, and his presence is, and his love is, you can smile at all your enemies. You're secure and you're safe. And it's glorious, and glorious things are said. And it's the sort of thing, the hymn goes on at the end to say, let the world deride or pity if I belong to God and I am in this place, because I will glory in your name. Solid joys and lasting treasure, none but Zion's children know. It makes the claim that whatever the world has, actually, the place you want to be and the place you need to be is where God's temple is, where he dwells. There are some lines in the Psalms that reflect this kind of feeling. Psalm 84, verse 10 says, better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked. Do you believe that? Do you believe that, I wonder? That better is one day in the company of God than 1,000 elsewhere. Where do you want to be? What place would you rather go to? What better company or better beauty or better safety or better love and forgiveness could you find anywhere than the presence of God? And this is why the temple matters in Chronicles. It gets all this attention because it represents everything. It represents this relationship with God that Israel enjoyed, that we were designed for, because you're with the one who you were made to be with. Who loves you, who forgives you, who accepts you, and who is God and Lord over you. And it's quite an uplifting thing when you realize that, because I don't know if you wander around any ruined temples recently, Colin, but after a while they all start to look fairly the same. You think, oh, well, that's a church, that's not a temple. Yeah.
I go around old castles, they're all the same, so my wife says.
Yeah, I quite like castles as well, they're interesting. At the end of the day, you come home thinking, well, I've seen some ruins, but I haven't necessarily met anyone special. Not so in the temple. In the temple is where God could be encountered. And that's absolutely huge. And the sad story is, for the rest of Chronicles, is that the temple is taken mostly for granted, and kings are mostly judged by how they treat the temple. And this is really interesting. So just to run through some stuff, under Rehoboam, the heir of Solomon, his sin, the king of Egypt, Shishak, sacks the temple. Abijah in 13, the king, boasts that they've got the right temple worship over his enemies. Asa, verse 13, refurbishes, chapter 13 of 2 Chronicles, refurbishes the temple, but then he later loots it or takes some gold from it. Jehoshaphat prays at it for God's help. Joash hides in it and is then made king through the temple and kept safe through it. And he then refurbishes the temple, although he later abandons it. Amaziah gets it sacked for provoking a stupid war Uzziah, King Uzziah, who's mentioned in Isaiah, he gets leprosy because he wanders into the temple and tries to act like a priest and offer incense when he's not supposed to. He takes liberties in the temple of God and he suffers for it. Who's next? Jotham rebuilds it, 27. Ahaz shuts it down and desecrates it, 28. Hezekiah purifies it from loads of pagan junk, verse 29, has a good old clear out. Manasseh sets up an idol in it, 33. Josiah finds the book of the law in it and refurbishes it in 34. And in 36, the final chapter with the 4 last kings, none of whom are very good, the city is captured on several occasions and the temple is looted on several occasions. And Jerusalem is exiled. So can you see, there's a lot of attention focused on how kings treat the temple. They either do it badly, they take it for granted, they abuse it, or they neglect it, or they refurbish it and they rebuild it and show a concern for where God lives. And at the end of it, we're left with this sense that God's presence has been taken for granted. And the problem of sin is that we turn away from God's presence, and we see that again and again. We turn away from God and look for other places and other gods and other places to find happiness and satisfaction. And therefore the temple of God is taken away at the end. Or is it? Last lines of the book. This is really interesting. Last lines of the book, after the exile, are actually really hopeful. There it is. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation through his realm and also put it in writing. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people may go up, and may the Lord their God be with them. Now, what strikes you about that, Colin?
Well, it's a very positive ending to a rather disastrous story, really, isn't it? Yeah. And that a pagan king should be sending them back so positively and willingly. Yeah.
Absolutely bizarre. Out of nowhere, after so many bad Judean kings, we suddenly get a pagan king who wants to build a temple. And he says, come back, let them go up. There's this invitation, which we'll pick up in Ezra and Nehemiah, about coming back to build the temple. And there's a sense there's hope for building the temple. There's hope for the future of this place, that it might be restored. And of course, after 70 years of exile, there is some restoration. As we'll see, it's actually not all that it's cracked up to be. But there is hope of going back to Jerusalem, isn't there? Because this place of atonement and joy and the goodness of God and his presence is reclaimed in the New Testament. Because when we come to the New Testament, we run into Jesus, who not only claims to be the king, the Christ, the Messiah, and the heir of the Davidic line, but this is a king who wants to build a temple. You might be thinking of the famous passage in John 2. Jesus is trashing the temple at the time, and he answers the people who he encounters there. He says, destroy this temple. I will raise it again in 3 days. And they replied, it's taken 46 years to build this temple, and you were going to raise it in 3 days. But the temple he'd spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, the disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scripture and the words Jesus had spoken. So actually, the temple he's spoken of was his body. And here we find that the king, the Messiah, when he comes, is a temple builder. He is going to be one who is going to build a temple and restore a place where we can be with God. And that place is him. Apparently, he is the temple. His body is the temple, not only because of Colossians, we've seen that all the fullness of God dwells in him, but also because through his body, he makes a way through his sacrifice on the cross for our sins, to actually, so we can come to God. And he offers us this promise of life with him in eternity, in the new creation, in a place that's like everything good about the Solomonic kingdom, except 1,000,000 times better, taken to the max and with no sin. And because Jesus is this temple building king who fulfills this hope and invites us to God's temple, it poses the question to you and me: where do you want to be? Where do you want to be? Where is your heart set on going, if you're honest? The Bible invites us to Zion, and not Zion in the Holy Land, unless you want to go on a travel company there, but actually through Jesus to come to the heavenly Jerusalem. And so where do you want to be? And I suppose my question, Colin, in application for us to think about is, what do you think distracts us from wanting to be in this temple? And what other places might we be tempted to seek after?
Well, the second question, what other places might we seek after? There is this passion amongst some people to visit everywhere in this world that they possibly can in the time that they have. And I've even heard an older lady, this was on a TV program, saying, oh, well, having been told she's going to die of cancer at last after recovery, says to her husband, yes, but we visited a lot of countries and had a lovely time. So that was their focus. And we notice that in ourselves and in others. We want to have all these experiences in places here and now, and think that this is the only time that we're going to be able to enjoy them. So we must make the most of them without a thought for what is potentially to come if we've trusted in Jesus. Well, what will come if we've trusted in him, but what others could enjoy as well. Yeah. But first part of your question, distractions, was it?
Yeah, distractions.
Yeah,
How do you think we get?
I think we need to be cautious of trying to squeeze as much life out of the here and now, because this isn't the place where we find ultimate life. And we do need to try and grow an appreciation of life in Christ and communion with him, so that if we enjoy him now, we'll enjoy him in the future. If we don't come to enjoy him now, we won't want to spend a lifetime with him, and actually we won't spend a lifetime with him. So it's serious. And also full of potential. I used to enjoy skiing, and I think I dream sometimes I might be able to spend all the time I want skiing. But anyway, doesn't mention snow in Revelation, does it?
I don't think it does, no. But it's just, there's always a tendency to, try to find heaven on earth in some ways. Whereas actually that's what we're praying for. We're praying your kingdom come on earth. But it's something God brings. It's something God will bring. He'll bring us there in his time.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean we don't care about this world, and it doesn't mean we don't do our best in this world and for this world and take joy in creation. But it does mean that we don't live here as if this is our eternal home.
Yeah.
In the sense that the here and now and the way the world is and the house I live in and the stuff I build is where I'm going to be eternally, because there's somewhere much better. Yeah. Great. Well, that's Book of Chronicles. We covered a lot today, so well done everyone for tracking with that. Until next time, stay close to Jesus.
And wash your hands.